A husband's worst nightmare. Vasectomy, affair, and a pregnancy test that unravels everything. Husband uncovers his wife's. I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, the faint pink lines mocking my every belief. How could this be? I had taken every precaution, had even gone as far as getting a vasectomy just the day after we'd talked about not having children. So how was this possible? How could Carol be pregnant when I couldn't even father a child anymore? The answer came to me in pieces, a conversation I overheard between her and her mother, fragments that echoed in my mind like a slow drum beat. Of course, I'll tell him it's his, Carol had said. My lover isn't ready for a baby. He might leave me. Besides, my husband has always wanted a child. The words sliced through me, cruel and sharp. My stomach churned as I realized the truth. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, had betrayed me. I didn't let her see me that night. I couldn't. I packed up my things, left without a word, and sent the pregnancy test to the wife of the man she'd been seeing. She called me just an hour later. Her voice was trembling, full of anger and hurt. But what she said made my world shatter. Kevin's fingers flew over the keyboard, the hum of his office buzzing around him, yet he barely noticed. He was immersed, his eyes flicking between multiple monitors as he completed the final touches on a high-stakes project proposal. The office was alive with the usual rhythm of deadlines and meetings, but for Kevin, time seemed to stretch and bend, his world reduced to nothing but numbers and data. He glanced at his watch, his stomach sinking slightly. It was past 6. Another day had slipped through his fingers, swallowed up by the relentless cycle of his job. With a sigh, he saved the file and shut down his computer, his eyes already focused on the calm that awaited him at home. The drive home felt like a reprieve, the familiar streets, the slow descent from the sharp, sterile environment of work to the warmth of his modest suburban house. A sense of peace washed over him as he turned into the driveway, the sight of his home like a balm to the frayed edges of his day. He thought of Carol, his wife of 6 years, the woman who, in every way that mattered, was his opposite. Where he was driven by logic and ambition, she was the soft, steady pulse of their shared life. Her yoga classes had always kept her busy, but he cherished the quiet evenings they spent together, unwinding after long days. "I'm home," Kevin called out, his voice bouncing off the walls as he stepped into the house. But the silence that met him felt different. The air was thick with an unspoken tension. His brow furrowed as he remembered Carol's mention of a late class. Shrugging off his jacket, he made his way to the kitchen, hoping to grab a quick snack before a long, hot shower. As he passed the bathroom, something caught his eye. A discarded white stick, half buried beneath a mound of crumpled tissues. His heart stopped. A chill spread down his spine as recognition slammed into him. The pregnancy test. Positive. His fingers shook as he picked it up, his mind racing. This couldn't be right. He'd had the procedure months ago. Carol and he had discussed this, agreed. Childlessness was their choice. So why was this test sitting in their bathroom, staring him down with undeniable truth? Kevin sank to the floor, his back resting against the cool tiles as his thoughts swirled in a dizzying vortex. There had to be a mistake. Maybe the test was faulty. Maybe Carol had used it out of habit and it wasn't even hers. But the nagging doubt clawed at him. The late-night yoga workshops that had been dragging on longer and longer. The way her phone was always turned face down, her growing emotional distance. No. His mind screamed in protest. Carol wouldn't betray him like this. She couldn't. But as he sat there, the pieces began falling into place with brutal clarity. A tiny crack appeared in the perfect world they had built, and it spread with terrifying speed. The life he had known, the life he had trusted, felt suddenly like a house of cards. "Carol," he whispered the name, his voice trembling in the silence of the bathroom. "How could you?" He stood, shaky legs carrying him into the bedroom. He needed to think, to process. But everywhere he turned, Their shared history mocked him. The pictures from their honeymoon, the dresser they had refinished together, the indentation in her pillow where her head had lain for years. The house suddenly felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in on him. With a growl of frustration, he grabbed his keys and stormed out the door, driving into the night with no destination in mind. His mind churned with questions, each one more painful than the last. By the time he returned, the weight of his thoughts had settled into something much darker, an icy resolve. He wouldn't confront her, not yet. No, he needed proof. Absolute, irrefutable proof. The next morning, Kevin's body felt like it moved of its own accord, mechanical, numb. He showered and dressed, but the motions were automatic, devoid of thought. He kissed Carol on the cheek as she stirred, muttering something about an early meeting before slipping out of the house without another word. Instead of heading to the office, Kevin parked a block away from their house, watching as Carol left for her yoga class. His heart thundered in his chest as he waited, each second stretching into eternity. Once she was gone, he slipped back inside the house. The silence hit him like a physical blow. The quiet was almost mocking, a cruel reminder of everything he no longer knew. He moved through the house, his eyes scanning each room. What was he looking for? A note? A text? Anything that would confirm the treachery he was beginning to believe was real. His hands trembled as he sorted through papers in the kitchen, the mundane act providing some small comfort in the chaos of his thoughts. Then he heard the front door open. Panic gripped Kevin like a vice. Carol wasn't supposed to be home for hours. Had she forgotten something? His pulse quickened, and he held his breath, listening intently. Her voice, low but unmistakable, drifted from the entryway, tinged with agitation. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "I can't keep this up much longer." Kevin's stomach clenched, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't move, didn't dare make a sound as he edged closer to the kitchen doorway, careful to remain out of sight. Carol continued, her words a slow, deliberate whisper. "Of course, I'll tell him it's his. Brian isn't ready for a baby. He might leave me if I push him for more, and besides, Kevin's always wanted a baby. It'll be easy to convince him. He's so naive." The ground beneath Kevin's feet seemed to shift, a wave of vertigo crashing into him. His knuckles tightened around the doorframe, his grip white-knuckled as the full weight of Carol's betrayal slammed into him. Brian. The name echoed in his mind like a guttural scream. The man she'd sworn was just a friend. The man who'd been the true reason behind the growing distance between them. Carol's voice faded as she moved deeper into the house, but Kevin remained frozen. His emotions roiled within him, rage, hurt, and something darker, colder, taking root inside him. Vengeance. The desire for it was so powerful it almost felt like an itch under his skin. But he didn't move, not yet. When he finally did, it was with an eerie calm that startled even him. Kevin slipped out of the house like a shadow, driving to work with an unsettling focus, the cold, calculating edge of his mind sharpening. To anyone else, it was just another day in the office, another series of meetings and presentations, but inside, something had changed. The man who had walked into that house the night before was not the same man who returned to work. The next morning, the sunlight filtered through the curtains, too bright, too harsh, in contrast to the storm raging inside Kevin. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of Carol's breathing beside him filling the otherwise silent room. Once, the rhythm of her sleep had been a source of comfort. Now it felt like a betrayal. He could feel the anger boiling in his veins, mingling with an intense sense of loss and pain. He waited until she left for her morning class, his body rigid with tension before rising. He moved through the house with surgical precision, like a man preparing to erase every trace of the life he had built. He packed his belongings quietly, methodically. Clothes, personal items, a few cherished mementos. But the family photos, those stayed behind. The thought of them was too much to bear. As he moved through the house, each room felt like a museum of their life together, full of memories he was suddenly desperate to escape. He paused in the kitchen, the pregnancy test still sitting in the bathroom trash, like a silent accusation. With a grimace, he retrieved it, slipping it into a small evidence bag he had kept for just this occasion. The proof. The irrefutable evidence of the life he had been living, the lies, the betrayal. It might serve him well later. Next came the final blow, the financial coup de grace. Kevin logged into their joint account, his fingers moving with practiced ease. Every last cent was transferred to a private account he had set up years ago, just in case. He changed the passwords to all of his personal accounts, erasing Carol's access with a swift keystroke. There was something chillingly satisfying about it. A bitter, cold satisfaction that began to replace the hurt. Let her come home to nothing. Let her feel the emptiness that had already begun to consume him. With his belongings packed and loaded into the car, Kevin took one last look around their home. The home they had shared for nearly a decade. Memories tugged at him, but he shoved them aside, hardening his heart against the flood of emotion. There was one final task to complete before he left for good. He sat at his laptop, fingers flying across the keys as he composed a single impersonal email. The recipient, Stephanie, Brian's unsuspecting wife. The message was short, businesslike, almost detached. Mrs. Mitchell, I believe this belongs to your husband. Sincerely, Kevin attached was the photo of the pregnancy test. He hit send without a second thought, the weight of the action settling in as the first domino in a series of events he knew would spiral out of control. It was done. Kevin took one final sweep of the house to ensure he had left no trace, no hint of his departure. With the front door locked and everything in place, he turned his back on the life he had known. He didn't look back as he climbed into his car and drove away, leaving behind the wreckage of his marriage. Hours later, Carol returned home, arms laden with groceries, her steps light with the weight of what she believed would be good news. Today, she would tell Kevin. She had rehearsed her words 1,000 times in her mind. He would be thrilled. She was sure of it. She could already picture the joy on his face when he heard she was pregnant. The dream they'd always talked about finally becoming a reality. But the house she returned to was empty. No sign of Kevin, no trace of the man she thought she knew. Carol pushed open the front door, a light smile playing at her lips. She'd picked up steaks for dinner, thought they could finally celebrate. She was excited to share the news, to tell Kevin what had been brewing inside her. But as she stepped into the house, the usual warmth felt distant, like the space itself was holding its breath. "Kevin," she called, her voice echoing in the silence. No answer. The house was still, unnervingly so. Frowning, Carol set the grocery bags on the kitchen counter and pulled out her phone to text him. It wasn't like Kevin to be late without saying something, but as her fingers hovered over the screen, something about the atmosphere struck her. The air felt heavy, empty. Her heart began to race. Slowly, she walked down the hallway, moving from room to room, her mind searching for an explanation but finding none. Kevin's closet, once brimming with his clothes, was now gaping with emptiness. His dresser, the one he'd promised to never leave untidy, hung open, its contents gone. Even his prized collection of vintage sci-fi novels was missing from the shelves in the office. "No," Carol whispered, panic rising in her throat. She could feel her knees weakening, but she stumbled forward, desperate to find some clue, anything. Her phone felt like it weighed a ton in her hand as she dialed his number with trembling fingers. It went straight to voicemail. No text messages, no calls, nothing. Her breath caught in her chest. Her mind raced. What had happened? How had he found out? She fumbled through her phone, her mind spinning, but the reality of the situation was sinking in fast. His accounts were deactivated. Everything was gone. Gone without a trace. She sank to the floor, the weight of it crashing down on her. She had no idea where Kevin had gone or how much he knew, but one thing was clear. She was alone, and everything was slipping through her fingers. In a frantic daze, she called Brian, dialing his number without thinking, desperate for someone to explain. Across town, in a well-appointed home office, Stephanie sat frozen at her desk, staring at the email on her screen. The name Kevin meant nothing to her, but the attachment, the image of a positive pregnancy test, was enough to unravel the fabric of her world. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the message. The words were simple. Too simple. Kevin had sent the photo, with a chilling message implying it belonged to her husband. Brian, the man she thought she knew. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, the blood draining from her face. She and Brian had been trying for a baby for years with no luck, no success. Now, this stranger's message made it clear that Brian had not only betrayed her, but that he had possibly fathered a child with someone else. Her mind flashed to their attempts at conception, the hope they'd poured into each month, the way Brian had promised he wanted a family with her. And now, the truth that Kevin's message implied twisted the knife. She felt something cold settle over her, a clarity as icy as it was final. She dialed Brian's number, the phone ringing in her ear, but this time there was no confusion or disbelief. She had only one goal now, to confront him, to force him to admit the truth. And if what Kevin said was real, then Brian would learn just how ruthless Stephanie could be when she was crossed. In a stark, sparsely furnished apartment on the other side of town, Kevin sat in front of his laptop, the dim glow casting a ghostly light on his face. The bed behind him was untouched. His focus was razor sharp as he combed through emails, documents, and files. Everything he had gathered, the bank statements, the property records, the text logs, painted a damning picture. He had spent hours compiling evidence, connecting the dots between Carol and Brian's affair. But now, it wasn't just about exposing the truth. That was a given. No, Kevin had a different purpose now. The betrayal he had suffered was too deep, too cutting for simple revenge. His goal had evolved into something darker, something more absolute, to ensure that Carol and Brian both paid for what they had done. He wasn't just going to ruin their relationship, he was going to dismantle their entire world. Each piece of evidence he gathered added weight to his resolve. Every file, every scan of his computer screen fed the growing cold satisfaction that settled over him. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that house just days ago. He was a man on a mission, driven by something far more destructive than the hurt he had once felt. Kevin's mind didn't stray from the task at hand. He was meticulous, calculating. The emails were out, the messages were sent. Everything was falling into place. And as he closed his laptop and prepared to leave, he felt nothing but the icy certainty that his plan was unfolding perfectly. Kevin's fingers hovered over the keys, the room heavy with tension. The glow of his laptop lit his face in the darkness, illuminating a quiet storm brewing within him. Emails, bank statements, text logs, each one a thread woven into the intricate tapestry of betrayal. Carol and Brian had been careful, methodical in their deceit, but Kevin, now a man transformed by rage, had done the same. He had pieced together the shattering evidence, a damning web of lies, each revelation colder than the last. This wasn't about justice anymore, no. This was something darker. He was going to tear their world apart, brick by brick, and watch as it crumbled into dust at their feet. A soft ping broke the silence. Stephanie had emailed. Kevin's lips curled into a grim smile as he opened the message. She had been a thread in this tangled mess from the start, but now she would be part of the reckoning. The final move was in play, and he could feel the pieces snapping into place. Soon Carol and Brian would be facing the consequences of their treachery, whether they were ready or not. Across the city, the night had begun to settle, dark and heavy, as if it too knew the storm was coming. In another small apartment, Carol's frantic attempts to reach Kevin were met with nothing but silence. Her fingers trembled as she dialed again, then again and again. Nothing. The weight of her failure pressed down on her chest, each unanswered call a reminder of how quickly everything had unraveled. The space around her seemed hollow, the absence of Kevin's things more haunting than any presence could be. The question rattled through her mind like a ticking clock. How had it all fallen apart so fast? A buzz broke through the stillness, and her heart leapt. Kevin. She lunged for the phone, hope surging in her chest. But it wasn't Kevin. It was Brian. Her stomach churned. Brian, she breathed. answering with shaky hands. Thank God, I need your help. Kevin's gone. He took everything. He knows Brian. He knows everything. His response was swift, cold, and precise. Carol, stop. We can't do this anymore. The words hit her like a slap. What? What are you talking about? The affair, the baby, all of it. It's over. Carol's mind scrambled to keep up, to make sense of the betrayal in his voice. The sudden finality of it. No, she whispered, her knees buckling beneath her. No, Brian, please, we can figure this out. The baby isn't... It's not a problem. A beat of silence, then Brian's voice, brittle and sharp. I can't be part of this, Carol. I won't. Don't contact me again. The line went dead. The weight of those words crushed her. She stared at the phone, unable to breathe as the truth settled in. A truth she had always known but never dared to face. Her world, so carefully built, had shattered. Meanwhile, across town, Kevin sat across from Stephanie in a quiet, dimly lit cafe. She was poised, collected, outwardly. But the subtle tremor in her hands, the strained look in her eyes betrayed her calm exterior. I appreciate you meeting with me, Mr. Carter, Stephanie said, her voice low but controlled, the words measured. I'll admit, your email came as a shock. Kevin didn't flinch. His expression remained stoic, his tone calm but not without a certain edge. Please call me Kevin, and I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. Stephanie's eyes darkened for a moment, a flicker of pain mingling with something colder. How long have you known about your wife and my husband? Kevin didn't hesitate. Not long. I found out yesterday when I saw the pregnancy test. It was like a punch to the gut. Stephanie's grip tightened on her coffee cup, her knuckles white. Brian and I, we've been trying for a baby. It was supposed to be our chance to build something real, something permanent. But this is nothing more than a mess. Kevin studied her closely. He understood the pain in her words because he felt it too. Betrayal wasn't just a wound you could heal, it carved deep, leaving scars that never truly faded. But there was no sympathy in his eyes, only a cold, calculating resolve. You're not the only one caught in the crossfire of their lies, Kevin said quietly, leaning forward just slightly. But soon this whole house of cards will come crashing down, and when it does, they won't just lose each other. They'll lose everything. Stephanie swallowed, the bitterness in her voice palpable. I never imagined it would come to this. But if we're going to tear down their world, we need to act fast. Time's running out. Kevin nodded, his mind already racing ahead, formulating the next move in this game of shattered trust. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about something far more personal, a reckoning. And in the end, no one would be spared. Stephanie's words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. For years, I thought she'd ended it, she said, her voice eerily calm. But the truth is, it doesn't matter what I thought anymore. The only thing that matters is what comes next. She looked at Kevin, her eyes glinting with something sharp, something determined. Kevin leaned in, his interest piqued. His voice dropped to a near whisper, the intensity of the moment not lost on him. What's your plan? A tight, almost calculating smile curved Stephanie's lips. I've been keeping records, she said, her fingers absently tapping on the coffee cup, betraying the stillness of her words. Brian's financial slip-ups, odd transactions, things that don't quite add up. I didn't want to resort to this, but here we are. Kevin's lips twitched, recognizing the turning point. Now you have no choice. Stephanie's gaze was sharp, her face pale but determined. Exactly. And from what you've shared about your wife, it seems we're in the same boat. The satisfaction of shared purpose rippled between them. As they bent over the papers on the table, their shared hatred for Carol and Brian felt like a living thing, thriving in the quiet intensity of their plotting. The wheels of retribution were turning, and neither of them had any intention of letting their target slip free. Carol and Brian had no idea what was coming for them. Kevin's heart hammered in his chest, his anger simmering beneath the surface. The power of vengeance was intoxicating. Back at the house, Carol sat hunched over her laptop, her eyes bloodshot and filled with desperation. Every password she typed was rejected. Every bank account she tried to access was drained. The digital trail Kevin had left behind was as ruthless as it was thorough. She felt the ground slip out from under her as each click revealed a new layer of betrayal, a new piece of evidence that Kevin had erased her from his life completely. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence like a shot in the dark. Hope surged, only to collapse when she saw who stood at the door. Not Kevin, but her mother, Rebecca, standing there with her arms crossed and an unmistakable air of disapproval. Without waiting for an invitation, Rebecca stepped past her daughter, her eyes scanning the mess of papers and empty space where Kevin's belongings once were. "Well," she said, her voice laced with disdain, "looks like you've really screwed things up, haven't you?" Carol felt a pang of frustration. "Mom, please, I don't need a lecture right now." Rebecca raised an eyebrow and settled herself onto the couch as if preparing for a long talk. "Oh, I think you do. Sit down, Carol. We need to have a real conversation about how you're going to fix this." Reluctantly, Carol sat, her posture slumped under the weight of her mother's presence. The words caught in her throat as she spoke. "There's nothing to fix," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Kevin's gone. He knows everything about the affair, the baby. He's left me with nothing." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing together in a tight line. "Nothing? You're carrying his child, for God's sake. That has to mean something." Carol's laugh was bitter and hollow. "It's not his child. You know that." Rebecca dismissed her with a flick of the wrist, her voice dripping with practicality. "Details. What matters is what you can prove. And right now, you're a pregnant woman, abandoned by her husband. That's a card you can play." Carol stared at her mother in disbelief. "You want me to manipulate him into staying with a baby that isn't even his?" "I want you to be realistic," Rebecca snapped. "You've made your bed, Carol. Now you need to figure out how to lie in it." Carol felt a wave of nausea, not from her pregnancy, but from the coldness of her mother's words. "I can't believe you're suggesting this." Rebecca rolled her eyes, her patience wearing thin. "Welcome to the real world, Carol. Time to start thinking about your future, and the future of that baby. Kevin may be angry now, but men come around when there's a child involved." As her mother's plan unfolded in her ears, Carol's desperation deepened. Was this really what her life had come to? Was she so trapped, so desperate that she would lie and manipulate in order to survive? The weight of it felt unbearable, yet as the reality of her situation set in, no money, no job, a baby on the way, Carol found herself reluctantly nodding along. What choice did she have? Meanwhile, across town, Kevin sat in his temporary apartment, the glow of his laptop casting a harsh light on his face. He had spent the afternoon with Stephanie, exchanging information, refining their strategy. Now it was time to make the moves that would finalize everything. He opened his laptop and began typing. First, an email to his company's HR department, explaining that he and Carol were separating due to her infidelity. He requested that she be removed from his insurance and any other benefits, effective immediately. He wasn't wasting any time. Next came a message to their mutual friends. He didn't go into the specifics, but the implication was clear. Carol had betrayed him, and now he was severing all ties with her. Finally, Kevin opened a new document. His fingers moved quickly as he outlined his case for divorce. Infidelity, financial betrayal, the works. Every shred of evidence he had gathered over the last few weeks was now locked in place. He wasn't just ending his marriage, he was dismantling Carol's entire life, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. By the time Kevin finished his final task, a bitter satisfaction filled him. The net he had carefully woven was tightening, and Carol had no idea how close she was to the edge. His phone buzzed, another missed call from her, the screen flashing with her name. His thumb hovered over the block button, but he let the phone rest on the table instead. Let her stew. The time for reckoning would come soon enough. The following morning dawned bright and unforgiving, as if mocking the chaos that was about to erupt in the lives of those unwittingly caught in his carefully constructed revenge. He dressed with deliberate precision, choosing a suit that exuded power and dominance. Today marked the first step in dismantling Carol's life, one careful, calculated move at a time. Kevin's first stop was the office of Patricia Hendrick, a high-profile divorce lawyer known for her ruthless efficiency, someone recommended by Stephanie. As he laid out his case, Patricia's eyebrows lifted with each new revelation. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes never leaving him. "Well, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice all business, "I must say you've certainly done your homework. With the amount of evidence you've gathered, a swift divorce in your favor should be easy to achieve." Kevin's lips curled into a thin smile, cool satisfaction in his voice. "That's exactly what I want to hear. How soon can we proceed?" Patricia's smile was as sharp as a blade. "I can have the papers ready by 3 p.m. today." "Perfect." As Kevin left her office, his phone buzzed again. A message from Stephanie. "It's done. Divorce papers are filed and Brian's financial troubles are now official. It's all about to crash down." Kevin allowed himself a fleeting moment of pleasure, a quiet chuckle bubbling up inside him. The storm was coming, and it was going to be glorious. Meanwhile, Carol's world was quickly unraveling. She awoke to a flood of messages, texts and calls from friends expressing their shock, disappointment, and bewilderment. It was clear that Kevin had been busy. Her phone rang again, this time with Ronald, her boss from the yoga studio. "Carol, we need to talk." Ronald's voice sounded strained, as if he'd been rehearsing what he was about to say. Carol's stomach dropped. "Ronald, please, whatever you've heard?" "I'm sorry, but we can't have this kind of drama attached to our studio. We're going to have to let you go." The call ended abruptly, leaving Carol speechless. In the span of a single day, she had lost everything: her husband, her lover, and now her job. She sank back into the couch, defeated, as she stared at her phone in numb disbelief. What more could possibly go wrong? The knock on the door answered that question. Carol opened it to find a courier standing there, holding out a thick manila envelope. "Carol Carter?" he asked. She nodded silently and he handed it to her. "You've been served." Her hands trembled as she tore open the envelope. Divorce papers. Kevin had filed for divorce, citing infidelity and financial deception, and he had the evidence to back it all up. She collapsed to the floor, the papers spilling from her hands like a torrential downpour. Sobs racked her body as she finally allowed herself to feel the crushing weight of her decisions, the consequences of everything she had done. Elsewhere, Kevin sat in his temporary office, outwardly calm and collected as he went through his daily tasks. To anyone who glanced his way, he was the picture of professionalism, focused and unshaken. But beneath the surface, he was methodically pulling the strings, watching everything fall into place. Another buzz, a message from Carol. "Kevin, please, we need to talk. I know I've messed up, but I'm pregnant." "Don't do this. We can fix things." He clenched his jaw as he read the message, his fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. With cold finality, he typed, "The child isn't mine. You know that." He hit send without hesitation and immediately blocked her number, his resolve hardening. It was over. As the hours ticked by, the repercussions of his actions started to materialize. Brian Mitchell had been arrested on charges of financial fraud, and his gym was under investigation. Clients were pulling out in droves, and memberships were canceled one by one. Stephanie had acted quickly, using her influence to expose Brian's secrets, and now his career was in freefall. By nightfall, his reputation would be in ruins. Kevin leaned back in his chair, a deep sense of satisfaction flooding him as he took in the day's progress. Phase 1 of his plan had been executed perfectly. Carol and Brian's worlds were crumbling, but this was only the beginning. There was more to come. As darkness fell, Kevin drove to the house that had once been his home with Carol. It was time for the final confrontation. He pulled into the driveway, steadying himself for what was to come. The lights inside were on, a warm glow illuminating the space. A space that had once been filled with memories of love and comfort. Now it only felt like a distant, hollow echo of the life they'd once shared. Kevin's car came to a stop, and he sat for a moment, staring at the house. It was the same one they had shared, but now it was nothing more than a reminder of what had been lost. His pulse quickened, not with regret, but with the cold certainty of what needed to be done. He stepped out of the car and approached the door. Despite having a key, he chose to ring the bell. Let her come to him. Let her feel the weight of what was about to happen. The door swung open, and there she stood, her face a mess of red, swollen eyes and disheveled hair. She looked like someone who had seen the weight of the world crash down in a single day. Kevin. She exhaled a breath of relief, but there was fear in her voice too. You came back. Not for long, Kevin replied, his voice cool, unwavering. We need to talk. He stepped inside, and for a moment, his eyes scanned the familiar surroundings. Everything appeared untouched, but it felt utterly foreign now. Carol stood before him, hope mingled with anxiety in her gaze, as though she didn't quite believe what was happening. Kevin, she began, her voice trembling, but he held up a hand to stop her. Don't, Carol. I didn't come here for apologies or explanations, he said, his words sharp, distant. I'm here to make things clear. Carol's posture sagged, the air thick with unspoken words. She gestured to the living room. Can we at least sit down? Kevin nodded stiffly, following her in, but he didn't sit. He couldn't. Not here. Not in this place that once felt like home. Carol took a seat, perched on the edge of the couch, her fingers nervously twisting together. I got the divorce papers, she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Good, he said flatly. Then you understand where we stand. Tears filled her eyes as she met his gaze. Kevin, please, we can fix this. The baby, it's not mine. Kevin cut her off before she could finish. Don't insult me, he said, his tone icy. We both know it's not mine. But we could raise it together, she pleaded. You've always wanted a family. We can make this work. Kevin's laugh was bitter, the sound harsh in the quiet room. A family built on lies? No thanks. He began pacing the room, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That you could pass off another man's child as mine, and I'd just ignore it? Carol winced at the accusation, but he wasn't finished. You made a choice, Carol, and now you'll deal with the consequences. He stopped pacing and turned to face her fully, his eyes dark with finality. Here's how this is going to go. You're going to sign the divorce papers, you're going to pack your things and leave this house, and you're going to leave me alone. Carol's voice faltered, small and frightened. Where am I supposed to go? I've lost my job. I have no money. That's not my problem, Kevin said coldly. You should have thought about that before you decided to betray me. Desperation colored her voice as she leaned forward. Kevin, please, I'm pregnant. I can't do this alone. For a fraction of a second, something in Kevin's expression softened, a flicker of the man who had once loved her. But just as quickly it vanished, replaced by a resolve that seemed unbreakable. You're not alone, Carol. You've got Brian. Oh, wait, he sneered. I forgot. He left you as soon as things got tough, didn't he? Carol's face crumpled, as though the weight of his words had crushed her. How do you know about that? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Kevin's smile was cold, void of anything familiar. I know everything, every lie, every betrayal, and I'm done. He walked toward the door, pausing as he placed his hand on the handle. You've got time to pack. After that, I'm changing the locks. With that, he stepped outside, the sound of her broken sobs echoing behind him. But he didn't look back. He couldn't. The following weeks blurred together for Kevin, consumed by a whirlwind of legal consultations, strategic decisions, and focused work. He immersed himself completely, using the anger and bitterness as fuel for productivity. His colleagues noticed his sharp concentration, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. One afternoon, as he sat in his new apartment, reviewing contracts, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Stephanie. "Kevin, are you free to talk?" He set the paperwork aside. "Of course, Stephanie, what's going on?" Her voice was tight, almost vibrating with excitement. "It's done. The divorce is final. Brian didn't get a single cent." Kevin's lips curled into a small, victorious smile. Everything had gone according to plan. No one had seen this coming, and no one would be spared. Kevin's lips twitched into a tight, almost imperceptible smile. "Congratulations," he said, his voice neutral. "How does it feel?" "Relieved," came Stephanie's tired response, a heavy sigh following. "But also a bit lost, to be honest. I've spent so much time focused on destroying Brian that now I'm not really sure where to go from here." Kevin's voice softened, carrying an understanding he couldn't quite hide. "You're free now. You have a chance to start over." A silence lingered, thick with unspoken thoughts. Then, on the other end of the line, Stephanie's voice emerged cautiously. "What about you, Kevin? How are things going with Carol?" Kevin's jaw tightened, his words clipped and firm. "She's out. The divorce should be finalized soon." "And the baby?" Stephanie asked gently, her hesitation palpable. "It's not my problem," Kevin responded, his voice cold. "Carol made her choices. Now she has to live with them." When the call ended, Kevin leaned back in his chair, a rare flicker of satisfaction coursing through him. Brian was in ruins, his finances devastated, his name dragged through the mud. Carol was no longer a part of his life, left to grapple with the consequences of her betrayal. And yet, despite all of that, something gnawed at him. Why didn't he feel a sense of victory? He pushed the thought aside, refocusing on his work. He had a future to rebuild. Weeks turned into months as Kevin channeled his anger and frustration into his career, climbing steadily up the corporate ladder with a ruthless single-mindedness. His personal life remained barren. He had convinced himself that it was better this way. No attachments meant no risk of betrayal. Then, one crisp autumn morning, as Kevin was leaving his usual coffee shop, briefcase in one hand and coffee in the other, a familiar voice called out his name. "Kevin!" He turned slowly, his heart giving a strange, involuntary lurch. There she stood. Carol. She looked different. Thinner, her skin pale, dark circles beneath her eyes. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly. For a brief moment, the world around him faded. The noise of the busy street, the people passing by, all seemed distant, as though time had stopped. "How are you?" Carol asked, her voice shaky. Kevin's fingers tightened around the coffee cup, but he kept his composure. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. "I'm managing," she replied softly, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Without giving her the chance to speak further, he cut her off. "Whatever it is you think you need to say, I don't want to hear it." He tried to step around her, but her next words stopped him dead in his tracks. "The baby's a girl," Carol said quietly. "I'm naming her Lily, after your grandmother." The words hit Kevin like a punch to the gut. Lily. His grandmother. She had been the only person who had truly cared for him, the only real family he'd ever had. Carol knew that. His blood ran cold, and without thinking, he turned back to face her. "You don't get to do that," he spat, his voice seething with anger. "You don't get to use my family's name to manipulate me." Carol flinched, but she remained firm. "That's not what I'm trying to do, Kevin. I just wanted you to know." "Know what?" His voice was rising, drawing attention from passers-by. That you're using my grandmother's name for a child that isn't even mine? A child you conceived while betraying everything we had? Tears spilled down Carol's face now, and she whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry. Kevin's chest tightened, and for a fleeting second, he was transported back to the happier times. The laughter-filled mornings, their easy companionship, the warmth of Carol's smile. But those memories were tainted now, forever poisoned by the lies. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm, to remain detached. Your apologies mean nothing to me, Carol. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it. With that, he turned and walked away, ignoring the sobs that followed him. The coffee had gone cold in his hand, but he barely noticed. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, hurt, regret. Emotions he'd buried deep and never wanted to face again. Later at the office, Kevin found it impossible to concentrate. The encounter with Carol had shaken him more than he was willing to admit. He was just about to call it a day when his phone buzzed. It was Stephanie. Kevin, are you okay? You sound off, she said, her concern evident. Kevin sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I ran into Carol today. There was a sharp intake of breath from Stephanie. Oh, how did that go? About as well as you can imagine, Kevin muttered. She's very pregnant. Stephanie's voice softened, gentle but probing. And how do you feel about that? Kevin paused for a long time, the weight of her question hanging heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. I don't know. Part of me wants to hate her, to hate that child, but part of you still cares, Stephanie finished for him. Yeah, Kevin whispered, the admission slipping out before he could stop it. I guess I do. The silence that followed was thick with understanding, and for the first time in months, Kevin allowed himself to feel the weight of everything he had buried. Then, after a long pause, Stephanie spoke again. Kevin, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? Her question was soft, almost tentative. Kevin was quiet for a moment, the question settling deep in his chest. The answer felt so elusive, so far away. Was he happy? Kevin's breath caught in his throat, his mind blank for a moment. I don't know, he admitted, his voice hesitant. Stephanie's response was soft, almost wistful. I'm getting there. It's not easy, but I'm learning to live for myself again. Not for Brian, not for revenge, just for me. Her words struck him in a way he hadn't expected. When was the last time Kevin had done something entirely for himself, not driven by anger or the need for retribution? Maybe, he thought slowly, maybe it was time to try that too. As the call ended, something within him seemed to change. The anger that had fueled him for so long began to soften, replaced by something gentler, a glimmer of hope. Not hope for reconciliation with Carol, he knew that chapter was closed, but hope for a future where he wasn't defined by her betrayal. The following morning, Kevin woke up feeling a purpose he hadn't experienced in months. He dressed deliberately, selecting a suit that made him feel powerful, in control. Today, he would truly begin to move forward. His first stop was Patricia Hendrick's office. When he walked in, her sharp smile greeted him immediately. Mr. Carter, what brings you in today? She asked. Taking a steady breath, Kevin replied, I want to finalize the divorce, as quickly and as cleanly as possible. Patricia's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Are you sure? With everything that's happened, we could push for a much more favorable settlement. I'm sure, Kevin answered firmly. I don't want anything from her. I just need this part of my life to be over. Signing the final papers, Kevin felt a surprising sense of relief. It was finished. He was free. Exiting the lawyer's office, he found himself walking toward the park, where he and Carol had spent so many happy afternoons. But instead of the familiar ache he expected, a sense of calm washed over him. This place held memories, yes, but he wasn't about to let them be overshadowed by the past. Sitting on the old bench they'd shared, he watched families pass by, and for the first time in a long while, He allowed himself to dream of a future, one where the pain wasn't the only thing shaping his world. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Stephanie. "Dinner tonight? I could really use a friend." Kevin smiled, typing back his affirmation before tucking his phone away. As he did, his gaze landed on a familiar figure across the park. Carol. She moved slowly along the path, her hand on her swollen belly, her face a picture of sadness and quiet resignation. For a brief moment their eyes met, and he felt the familiar sting of old pain, old anger. But it was muted now, overtaken by something more detached, something closer to pity. Carol had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences, just as he was. He nodded at her, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement, and turned away, walking toward a future that didn't include her. Later, as Kevin sat across from Stephanie in a cozy, dimly lit restaurant, he felt a rare sense of peace. They shared stories of their lives, of what had changed and what lay ahead. There was laughter, and for the first time in a long time, Kevin truly felt relaxed. "You know," Stephanie said, sipping her wine, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm almost thankful for what happened with Brian and Carol." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "Thankful?" She nodded, her expression serious. "If they hadn't betrayed us, we'd still be stuck in those miserable marriages. Now we actually have a chance at real happiness." Kevin paused, reflecting on her words. She was right. Despite the pain, this journey had brought him to a place of strength, a place where he could look ahead, not back. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. Stephanie's smile was warm, her eyes bright as she clinked her glass against his. "To new beginnings." As they continued their meal, Kevin couldn't help but feel a spark of anticipation. The future stretched out before him, uncertain but full of possibility. He didn't know exactly where the road would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he was eager to find out. The next morning, Kevin's phone chimed. He glanced at the screen. It was a message from Carol. "Kevin, I know you probably won't read this, and I don't blame you, but I need to say one last time that I'm sorry for everything. I know that sorry doesn't fix what I broke, but I hope you can find happiness again. You deserve it." Kevin stared at the message for several moments, his finger hovering over the delete button. With a deep breath, he pressed it. He didn't need Carol's apologies. He was building his own happiness now. As he prepared for work, Kevin caught sight of himself in the mirror. The man staring back at him was different from the one who had discovered Carol's betrayal. Stronger. Wiser. Ready for whatever came next. With a confident smile, Kevin grabbed his keys and walked out the door. The sun was shining. A new day had begun, and he was ready to face it. The story of Carol's betrayal would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. Kevin was moving forward, one step at a time, into a future full of promise, and he wasn't looking back.